All right, now, he is being, he was convicted in a sense of being the lone gunman. And this is why you said designated driver, that there was somebody else. As you now know, was there an unidentified individual that was just assumed to be Hamilton because of the way the person was dressed?
Well, that's right. I mean, we have absolutely no way of being 100% sure that this man was Hamilton. I mean, he was dead, so there wasn't going to be an identity parade. The man who witnesses say they saw getting out of the van when he parked at the school, there was a local woman. She said this man had a woolly hat pulled down to his eyebrows. He had large, dark-framed glasses on, and he had a jacket zipped up right to his chin. This wasn't, showing any facial features at all. And in fact, when there were sort of drawings of the gunman in the press in the days afterwards, I mean, it was quite an anonymous image. You would never be able to identify whether it was Thomas Hamilton or anybody else. And the two teachers who were shot and injured, who of course say, oh, Hamilton walked into the gym and he started firing at them immediately. Both of these women have admitted they never knew Hamilton. That, they wouldn't have known what he looked like. They hadn't had any dealings with him.
Do you think they're...
Sorry?
No, could their testimony have been coerced?
No, I don't think it would have been coerced. I think, they would have been deeply traumatized. They were both shot. They went off to a storeroom off the gym to hide. I think that when they were recovering in hospital and they were told the gunman was this Thomas Hamilton, why would they have any reason to doubt that?
Right.
Would they?
But they didn't no one witnessed the actual murders taking place, is that correct?
Well, there's one witness who claims that he saw Thomas Hamilton kill himself, and this was a student teacher who claims he didn't give evidence at the inquiry, though. And it's hard to really know what to make of his evidence. But no, there were no... as I said, the teacher who was the class teacher was killed. Right. Most of the children in the gym were dead. The other children that were in the gym were critically injured. There's only one child that survived that whole incident with no gunshot injury at all. A little girl called Victoria Porteous, who lay down and pretended she was dead. And she just didn't move. But she saw what was going on. And I have a copy of her parents' witness statement that was given to their lawyer. Again, that was a document that was meant to have been locked away for 100 years, and nobody was meant to read it. And this girl, Victoria, quite clearly saw what was going on. And she gave a statement to her parents, who recounted it to their solicitor, that actually makes a comment about when this man entered the gym. But somebody fired into the bottom end of the gym where Hamilton entered the gym. But so much of the statement is blanked out. So it's actually very hard to make sense of. But it's not just names that are blanked out. There's actually the real gist of what is in that statement has been removed. But they've left one word in. They should have probably taken out the word Hamilton, because when they said, oh, he fired into the bottom end of the gym where Hamilton entered the gym, just gave away so much. And these parents also made in their statement that they observed when they went to the gym to see the scene of crime afterwards, which all the parents were invited to do. They saw 2 bullet holes in the bottom end of the gym where Hamilton was said to have committed suicide that were 6 inches from the ground and 2 inches apart. And we know from what the scene of crime officer says that Hamilton was supposedly, when he shot himself through the roof of his mouth, the scene of crime officer says the bullet exited the top of Hamilton's head, but the pathologist says it exited from behind his left ear. And if you look at that, fitting in with what the statement of the uninjured child said, it really does lead to the conclusion that Hamilton was shot and killed on scene. And that then leads to a whole host of other questions.
Right.
Because if we were told he committed suicide and he didn't, then that alone requires explanation. I mean, even for all that he'd committed, if he did commit this evil act, the man still deserved to stand trial. And I would also claim that his death has added to the trauma because we've no explanation for why this happened.
Now, the thing is, if he in turn was murdered, obviously you're going to have an exit wound from, I would assume, well, you're going to have an entrance wound from other than, I would say, his mouth. Is there any kind of confliction with the forensics that would state...
Sorry, the pathologist's report is really very ambiguous, and I've been using Freedom of Information to try and get answers from the pathologist who supposedly carried out the post-mortem on Thomas Hamilton. But I've come to the conclusion that it was just a falsified report. It doesn't even, the actual description of the body, I've got the full autopsy report now, and the description doesn't even fit Hamilton. I mean, I don't believe that it was another body. I mean, you start getting, conspiracy after conspiracy here, but it does make you wonder whether, given that if Hamilton was murdered, whether they even bothered with the post-mortem, and they just filled out, a form. Because if they didn't want the truth to come out that he'd been killed, then in a sense, why bother doing a post-mortem? And interestingly, after I really put on the pressure with Freedom of Information at the end of last year, Professor Busuttil from Edinburgh University, who shouldn't have even been doing the post-mortem, I mean, he had a contract to work for the Crown Office, but not for the Stirling area. He just suddenly resigned last December. And I think that he knew that his falsified post-mortem report was catching up with him.
Now, the bullet holes that were at the bottom of the wall, the wall through which Hamilton passed, obviously through a door.
Through a fire exit door, yeah.
Okay. Now, does that mean that there might have been... let me ask you what you think. Do you believe that Hamilton shot at all? Or do you believe there were two shooters? Or how do you make out what happened?
For really most of the last 4 years, I did believe Hamilton had committed the massacre, but that he'd been killed on scene. But I haven't been able to get any satisfactory explanations for that. Why would that have happened? How could it happen? I mean, if the massacre was over within 3 minutes, as we were told, how did this person get there so quick and kill him? And why did they kill him? But of late, as I say, I've been going back over all the evidence, and I now actually really seriously wonder whether Hamilton had the capability to commit that massacre. This was kind of like almost a skilled, trained soldier. The speed with which he walked through that gym and disabled the children and stood over them and shot them through the head. This gunman was going for the highest death count possible.
And with a certain degree of precision, too.
Absolutely.
When you say
Hamilton was not, he wasn't even a competition shooter. He actually, that's one of the reasons why I always say he held his firearms illegally, because he didn't meet any of the requirements to be allowed to have firearms. But the police are supposed to do regular checks to ensure that handgun owners are using them for the stated purpose they put in their application, i.e. target shooting, competitions. Hamilton wasn't a competition shooter. He wasn't even a particularly good shooter, apparently. And he wasn't a fit man either. I mean, that's the other thing. He was fat. He was very unhealthy. That this sort of military precision of what happened in that gym, it just doesn't, I can't see it now being Hamilton. I think he was the patsy.
Did Hamilton ever have any business around the school? Was anybody familiar with him at all? Or was this strictly right out of the blue with this individual probably?
He did have connections with Dunblane, yes. But he had connections really all over central Scotland. Because he used the gyms, you see, in the schools to run his clubs.
And was Dunblane's gymnasium one of them?
Well, they tried to make out that had never been the case, that he never had used Dunblane Primary School. But one witness did give evidence saying that Hamilton had used Dunblane Primary School gym, but he certainly used Dunblane High School gym up until the end. And the other thing about these clubs, though, as well, these clubs were really just a way of Hamilton getting boys
networking,
into his clutches, so that he could take them away on summer camps. That was where he really enacted most of his, disgusting paedophilic activities. I mean, when I say that, I'm not particularly sure that he laid a finger on boys other than physically hurting them. I think he was quite sadistic. But I'm not sure that he sexually abused any of the boys. I think they were mostly fodder for his photography.
Did no one know that this was going on?
Yes, they did. Yes. There were junior police officers who tried to get Hamilton stopped over and over and again. I mean, there's a lot of detail about this in my book. There's several chapters about it. It's mind-boggling. I mean, you just couldn't imagine a similar situation where a man with that kind of reputation was allowed year after year to take young boys away to a remote island, take them away from the parents. He took all the pocket money away from them. He took all the clothes away from them when they got there, and they had to dress in just little shorts for the whole time. Now, if you've ever been to Scotland, you don't even have a summer in Scotland, not even in summer. And these kids were running around in shorts, and he had photography sessions where he put his special boys into red swimming trunks.
Not that this is that important, but I got to ask you because I'm just curious. When you talk about boys' clubs and such, I mean, usually, I remember back in the old days up in New York and stuff, there were boys' clubs, and they would revolve around activities, many of them sports. How did he sell what he was doing? What was the attraction there, at least on the surface?
He claimed they were gymnastic clubs.
Right, okay.
But you see, he didn't, I mean, that was another part of Hamilton's history that was covered up at the inquiry, and again that I only found out about through these documents. Hamilton didn't even have any appropriate gymnastic qualifications. I mean, and there were people who complained all the time that he stretched the boys too far. He worked them too hard. These were young kids. They were 5 to sort of 9 years old. And when I saw in these documents that I found 3 years ago that the only gymnastic qualification he had was a Women's Artistic Assistant Award. So I wrote to the national body, the British Amateur Gymnastics Association, and I said, can you confirm for me that Thomas Hamilton held a Grade 5 Women's Assistant Artistic Award? And they wrote back and they said yes. And I said, and did that qualify him to coach boys? They said no, he wasn't qualified to coach boys, and he certainly wasn't qualified to coach them alone. And that was all covered up at the inquiry. There's a 20-year history on this man. It's scandalous.
Well, now, let me start putting this together a bit.
You've got to read my book.
Yep. And, but now it starts to look like, and this is not unusual, because we have our own situation here in the States, Sandra, where we have what they call the Bohemian Club. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I haven't heard of that, no.
And that's where the rich and powerful go, and reports are from those who have penetrated the facility and have pretty accurately documented what went on, that you have these people who feel they are, and perhaps they are, in fact, beyond the reach of the law, that they get involved in the most debauched behavior you can imagine or don't want to imagine. Now I'm starting to think that, is it possible that some government officials were hooked into him?
Yes.
All right.
Absolutely. And in fact, there was a newspaper report a couple of weeks ago that was about it was a murder of a young girl about 20 or 30 years ago, and the report was actually about this girl and the man who allegedly killed her. But there's a mention in this article about a network that operated in Scotland who called themselves the Untouchables, and Hamilton was part of this network. He was a driver. He was a driver particularly for a senior police officer with Central Scotland Police, who he took to sex clubs and other events around Scotland. Yes, that's the cover-up is. I mean, you can understand why they had to cover up all this about Thomas Hamilton. This was a man who was getting away with murder long before the murders on the 13th of March.
Well, if some powerful people were dealing with him for their own tawdry interests.
He was a supplier.
Yeah.
I think he wasn't just a supplier of images, of pornography. I think he supplied boys as well. Because the area, I mean, it's a classic case. I mean, paedophilia is now sort of moving out to the poorer countries, isn't it? Where you have that old rock star, Gary Glitter, who's taken himself off to Thailand. And we've seen that now, that, as the West is becoming more aware of the whole spectre of paedophilia, paedophiles are moving out to target more vulnerable children. But during Hamilton's reign, as I call it, in the 1970s to 1980s, right up until the massacre in the mid-1990s, I mean, the boys that he targeted to come into his clubs were from the poor villages.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that part of central Scotland's got lots of tiny little, like, old mining villages with lots of, not neglected children, but, maybe where the parents aren't keeping an eye on them as much as more middle-class parents do. And they went off to these clubs and then went off to these camps where they were basically terrorised.
Yeah.
And I think, yes, Hamilton was involved with a network of people in the Scottish judiciary. I mean, the Scottish Crown Office have gone out of their way to keep the truth about Thomas Hamilton's background and the truth about the massacre concealed. You have to ask why, don't you?
Well, if it were determined by the higher-ups that now he might become an embarrassment or it was a good time to make this all go away, you can understand why they might want to terminate him. But now you get involved and it's like, okay, well, why do we have to do this in a school with children? And there's some more yardage that's gotten out of this in a sense also with regard to gun control and control over people in general. Now, we only have a couple of minutes left, but I did want to touch upon one thing that we have talked about on the side, and that is you are starting to realize as you network with people like Andrew McGregor, let's say, in Australia, perhaps with our conversations, that this may have fit a pattern that is taking place globally and is not so much an isolated incident.
Yeah, I mean, that's, again, I think I've been quite naive. I've resisted this argument for quite a long time. I mean, when the shooters in Great Britain, obviously, immediately there was the handgun ban after Dunblane, and these guys, nearly 60,000 of them, still very aggrieved, and understandably so. They were made out to have been guilty of this crime, when clearly they weren't. And they gave me all this stuff about how it been the intention of the British government to disarm the population, from the beginning of the last century. And I just kept thinking, but no government could be so evil to allow the massacre of children. I just couldn't compute it. It just wouldn't work in my head. But then, as you say, I'm now networking more with people who have been researching massacres in other countries. I look at my ex-partner Mick North's involvement with gun control and how he has to have been brainwashed in some way, because I've talked to him, sort of almost for 3 years solid about my research and my findings, and you would think as a parent he would want to know the truth about his daughter's murder. But instead, it's just something that it's pushing on one side, because he's very much now working on the agenda of GCN, Gun Control Network, and IANSA, which is based in the States, I believe, International Action Network on Small Arms.
I'm not familiar with them.
Yeah, that's the US base. I think it started out from Britain. It's funded by, I think he's originally Hungarian, George Soros.
Oh yeah, you got it.
He funds IANSA, and I just have to wonder whether Mick's now being brainwashed, because how can he turn his back on the truth
Right. Well, if Soros's involved with it and his globalist ideas, then this is not a good thing. That's for sure.
Macon GCN is very heavily involved with Soros. Very.
Not a good sign. Well, we're also coming up against the top of the hour and at the end of our time together. Sandra, one more time, how people can buy the book, and also tell them about the website.
Well, as I say, I hope you're going to put it up on your website, but if anybody wants to email me immediately, my email address is Sandra Uttley, Uttley, at AOL.com. My website address is www.dunblaneunburied.co.uk, and I can also be emailed through the website as well. And there's details about the book on my website.
Okay. Also,
hopefully you'll be able to reach me if you want a copy of the book.
Without a doubt. I also want to say, Sandra, stay on the line if you will, because I'm